So good evening, everyone, and welcome. This is Kim Adams, your host of Vital Conversations, Dialogues on Living and Dying Well. And I'm happy to be back with you here in my new space. I know that I had written to my last newsletter said that I was moving to Baltimore, Maryland. So here I am. So my apologies that we did not have a webinar last month. It just wasn't possible with the move, as I'm sure most of you can understand. But tonight we are back, and we are in for a real treat. Our guest tonight is going to present some really valuable practical information regarding funerals and funeral planning and all things funeral. So I hope you've come with your questions and comments. But speaking of, we have the chat function here on the side of your computer, so feel free to type in now and let us know where you're listening in from. And that's your way to communicate with Rachel and I tonight. Questions, comments, we want this to be really interactive because, as I mentioned and wrote on Facebook and on LinkedIn and in the newsletter, that Rachel's really a walking consumer report around funerals and funeral planning. So take advantage of her knowledge tonight. So again, it's Kim Adams, and happy to welcome you here. If it's your first time, welcome, and hope that you'll get value out of the session tonight. And if you're returning, welcome back. So before we get started, again, the chat is your opportunity to connect with Rachel and I. And I think that's it. The housekeeping, if for some reason your audio or video goes a little wonky, just refresh your browser. And if it's still having problems, I put a sticky note in the chat that this is also being recorded live on YouTube. So you can go to that and listen to it here. You would need to come back here to type any questions or comments, but at least you could hear us on the YouTube. So without further ado, let me get started and properly introduce our guest tonight. And Pashta, welcome. Pashta from British Columbia, Canada. So Rachel Zeldin. Rachel's the founder and the brainchild behind the website I'm Sorry to Hear, which is imsorrytohear.com, and I'll be putting that in the chat. Rachel's a Philadelphia native and a self-proclaimed consumer advocate who works passionately on I'm Sorry to Hear with the goals of providing equal access to information on funeral planning and encouraging and sharing one's personal funeral planning experiences. She's a frequent speaker on the topic of funeral planning and is the co-founder and hostess of Death Cafe Philadelphia. And she's a founding member of the newly established nonprofit funeral advocacy group, Funeral Consumer Alliance of Greater Philadelphia. I'm Sorry to Hear, the website that she's founded, is a website focused on improving the consumer experience in funeral and end-of-life planning. As a leader in the death tech movement, Rachel's online site is breaking down barriers, connecting funeral consumers with funeral vendors, as well as funeral planning tools and educational resources. So without further ado, welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'm happy to be here.
Great. We're thrilled that you're here. And, I know that your previous work is in the finance industry. So share with us a little bit about how you kind of got into the funeral home and advocacy and all that great stuff from such a big change from finance.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I think that when most people look at me and they learn about what I do, they're like, you? Like, what are you doing working in the funeral world? Like, you're young and you're female and you break that mold of everything. But first off, I'm not a funeral director. I have never been and I never will be. I approached I'm Sorry to Hear, and actually we'll be launching our new product this summer called Funerals 360. Same great company. It'll just be a much better website than what we have today. But I started this as a tool for people like me and you. So to give you some perspective, a few years ago, I was late 20s, and my great uncle died unexpectedly. And like most families, we were unprepared. And my mom, being the closest next of kin to him, he wasn't married, he had no kids, said, family, let me do the planning and I'll check back and we'll figure out a way to pay for this together. So I watched her struggle for like 3 or 4 very long days to find basic information about funerals. So how to plan a funeral, where do you get funeral services, how much do they cost, what is the difference between options A, B, and C? And when I watched her literally like spend days getting to information that if it was planning a vacation or a wedding or buying a car or buying a house, you would have had it instantly. I said, why are you doing it like this? Isn't there a better way to plan and get this information? And there simply wasn't. And this was 2011, mind you. This is like prime internet age. So when, once the funeral was all done, I said, let me look further into this and just figure out, did we miss something? Is there really a website out there that helps you plan a funeral? And there just wasn't anything that I felt met the need of the modern consumer that, worked in the same way that you would expect to plan a vacation, like I said, or plan a wedding. And I just really desired having a spot that I would enjoy using, even at this really, down time in life, but like somewhere that would help me organize and get to information quickly and just let me do my research at my own time and my own pace without having to go somewhere and be in a sales environment and make rash decisions. So that's really what got me in here. And it prompted my leave from finance and moved me over to funerals. And I've, really haven't looked back.
Wow. So many times we get involved in something from a personal experience. And I mean, it speaks volumes what you're saying, because it's such a vulnerable time, right? We're just really expected to just make all these decisions, and we'll get into like pre-planning and all that stuff in a little bit, but it's like all of a sudden it's hitting you and a death and grief and planning. And you're right. I mean, at such a time, you really want to have information that you're going to go in as an informed consumer, right? Someone that's going to know what their options are and things like that. So yeah, your website, which of course, I've been on many times, it's just phenomenal. And we'll get to all the pieces in a little bit, but, talk to us a little bit about the importance of planning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think that there's, if there's 3 points that people take away from this conversation tonight, I want it to be know your rights. So know your rights as a consumer. There are federal laws that are there to protect us, and there's also state laws that protect or prevent us from doing certain things, like having home funerals or having death with dignity. So the first thing is know your rights. And so when you go to plan a funeral, know that you have the right to get a price list, for example. You have the right to comparison shop. You have the right to refuse certain services such as embalming. These are really important things that people don't really think about until it's too late. And when they're just, presented with the options, they just choose without knowing better. So I would recommend to everyone to know the funeral rules. And we could talk about that later if people want to know more about them. But the funeral rules are a Federal Trade Commission established law that gives us rights as funeral consumers. Also, again, knowing your rights. In certain states, you have the right to care for your own post-death. So having home vigils and home viewings and home funerals and transporting the body and taking care of your loved one. In certain states, only 8 or 9 of them, you can't. You must use a funeral director. So people that wish to have a more intimate experience with the death care process should be sure to check. Our website has that information, as well as a few other really good resources about whether or not you're allowed to have a home funeral. So again, point 1 would be, know your rights at a federal level with the Federal Trade Commission's funeral rule, and at a state level, whether you're allowed to do certain things or not. The second point I would say is plan ahead. So there's a really sad statistic out there that out of the population over 50, only a quarter of them do any sort of pre-planning. And mind you, death is not reserved for the elderly and feeble. Death happens to everyone at all ages. So it's never too soon to think about what you want, talk about it with your loved ones who will likely be planning for your care, and establishing that in some sort of written format. So when you do pass away, people lose their brains, they have somewhere to look and follow directions. And the third thing I would say is to shop around, whether it's at in advance or at the time in need. The cost of funeral services and cemetery services and funeral products in general varies so much from place to place. And I'm not just talking about from Baltimore to Philadelphia, but I'm talking within a certain city, within a certain neighborhood. There could be thousands of dollars of difference between identical services. So don't just walk into the first funeral home or cemetery that you see. Don't just go back to the same one that you've been using your family's been using their their whole lives because that's what you do, make sure you call or visit a few of them and make sure that, you're not paying more than you need to, right?
Right.
So that's what I would say. I would say like those kind of 3 points would be my big hitters. And, I'm happy to dive in more on any one of those as we talk tonight.
Sure. This is great. And again, we're getting some folks. Thank you for, we have Amy from Massachusetts, and we have Maxine from Miami, and Chris from Massachusetts, and Pashta, as I mentioned earlier, from Canada. And so, I know that there's a lot more people on the call tonight. So, feel free to let us know where you're listening in from. And also, type in some questions and comments. Like I said, we have Rachel here at our disposal here, and she's extremely knowledgeable. And also, I have listed her website in the chat, imsorrytohear.com. So check that out as well. So yeah, Rachel, I think, let's start backwards with the kind of shop around piece. We don't just go into a car dealer and say, hey, I want that red Toyota. Let's sit down and do the paperwork. So, I think it makes sense that, as you said, shop around. And one of the pieces that I've been hearing a lot about is that kind of the family-owned funeral home may not be the family-owned funeral home anymore.
Totally. That's an awesome point. So shopping around for a couple of reasons. One, to make sure that you're not overpaying, because why would you want to overpay for this service that no one's actually enjoying?
Right.
And number two, it's because you need to know who you're working with, right? Are these people that you're going to enjoy working with? Are they going to make this experience more pleasant? Because they could make or break a funeral, right? If they're miserable to work with, they're going to set the tone for the whole event. And also, what so many people don't realize is that 20% of the funeral homes in this country are owned by a corporate giant, not just one, but a handful of them. And a couple of these are, and they're all for profit. All are for profit. A couple of them, all of them, so SCI, which goes to business as Dignity Memorial, and Stonemore, which doesn't go to business as anything but John F. Smith Funeral Home or whatever they took over. They don't publicly advertise that they're a corporate-owned funeral home, aside from Dignity, which does use their branding, and it's a big difference. Study after study after study has shown that the corporate-owned funeral homes have significantly higher prices than independent funeral homes. And aside from the pricing, they also lack the flexibility that a locally owned business would have, because they have all these procedures that they have to follow because they're guided by a corporate entity. So, for example, with my great uncle Rafe, we went to a local funeral home, and he knew that we were in a bind. He knew that Uncle Rafe had not a dime to his name, and our family was really scraping together money. So he said, listen, I understand that this is hard on you guys. So I'm going to throw in the family car. I'm going to throw in the flower car. And, he threw in a couple of other things. That was a choice he made, right? To give us those and not charge us for those. That would never happen with an SCI property. They would be like, oh, can I upsell you on this and cross-sell you on that? And by the way, it's now $15,000. So it's a big difference. So, if you're not sure, just ask. Be like, are you the owner of this establishment? No, who is? And I think that, if they're an honest establishment, they should let you know, oh, no, we're a Dignity Memorial property, or we're owned by Stonemore. But it's really deceiving. It's really, really deceiving. And in fact, it was one of those things that annoyed me enough that when we started aggregating all the funeral homes in the country for imsorrytohear.com, one of the defining factors that we picked out as data to collect was who owned them. So every funeral home on our website has an indicator that says independently owned or corporately owned. And if they're corporately owned, we say by who, because we think it's just important for people to know who they're working with.
Great. So if people don't feel comfortable asking the funeral home directly, it sounds like there are resources on your page where they can go and check whether it's independent or corporate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. Great. Because one of my questions was, how do we know? And people are going to tell us, but it's great that you've aggregated such data.
We've done the hard work on that. Yeah. Honestly, it was not easy. SCI owns 2,500 or 3,000 properties across the US,
Mm.
but they're a little bit easier to pick out because when you find their website, it takes you to the big Dignity website, and it'll say Dignity Memorial, and then it'll say John F. Smith and Son Funeral Home and the address. But they retain that old name that has goodwill in the community. And they might even retain that old owner, but that old owner really has no privileges of decision making anymore. Whereas Stonemore, which is a second largest business, there is almost nowhere for you to find that it is a Stonemore property. They do a really, really, really good job of hiding that fact from consumers.
Mm.
And I don't know if there's been a study specifically on Stonemore and how their prices compare, but I know for a fact that SCI properties cost, on average 30% more, but we've seen them be 300% more than another funeral home in the area.
Wow. Speaks volumes to your first point about knowing your rights, right? And knowing that, we can ask for a price list, we can compare and shop, and we can refuse different services. Amy has a great question around that. She says, Rachel, what are your thoughts around prepaying for funerals?
Oh, so these are my thoughts, and they're also probably the thoughts of the Funeral Consumers Alliance. I'm a board member in Philadelphia, and I've also just been intertwined with them since I started my company. I use them as like my beacon. Am I doing what's best for the consumer? And the overwhelming thought on this topic is to pre-plan, but not to prepay. And the one exception to that would be is if you have to spend down for Medicaid purposes.
Okay, yep.
And then that would be a good use of your money. Mm-hmm. But the reason why they say not to prepay is because a lot of things change between now and then. Today you might be opting for burial, but in 15 years you might say, you know what, I'd rather a cremation. The funeral home that you select today might not be open for business 15 years from now. The cemetery that you bought a plot in, again, all of a sudden you and your husband or wife want a cremation, you no longer need that plot. And, people are like, oh, well, I'll just sell it. It's not that easy. And in some states like Pennsylvania, when you have to put money into a prepaid funeral trust for Medicaid purposes, it's got to be irrevocable. And in a lot of states, they interpret this to mean that you can't take the money out, but you can move it. So if you don't want to work with this establishment because you don't like them anymore, or they're no longer a business, or you move to another state and you want to be buried or have your funeral services in another state, you could do so. In states like Pennsylvania, which I know because I live here, irrevocable has an additional meaning, whereas you cannot even move that money. So what happens if that funeral home is out of business, or they have a new owner, or again, you move out of state? Your money is locked in and you cannot move it. A much better idea would be to shop around, call around, get some price lists. In Funerals 360, we'll actually be posting the price list of a lot of these funeral homes, as many as that we can gather. And you can get a rough estimate of how much your funeral would cost, and put that in a savings account that is payable upon death. And you can name a co-signer on that, a co-account holder. And so when you die, they have the ability to go and access those funds and disperse those funds as they see fit. And they're not going to be locked into a funeral home or into a cemetery in particular. So it gives you more flexibility with what to do with that money. And should you not need to spend all that money, guess what? It goes back to the family, which is nice, right?
Great.
They could go on vacation.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that's huge what you just shared in terms of, because I just know so many people, some of my family included, where it's like, they just want to make sure it's the family-owned business or the family funeral home, and they pay, and it's not for Medicaid spend down or anything like that. And then you're right. What if they move? What if any number of things can happen? And I don't know about you, but spending money on a funeral like that, to know that it may not be guaranteed because circumstances in life happen. So I love your alternative, putting it into an account where, it's available upon when it's needed. So I guess your message is pre-plan, but don't prepay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also just another point is like, certain funeral services don't even cost that much. So if you really just want to have a direct cremation and you want, your family to have the ability to have a memorial service wherever, whenever they want, that could be only, $500, $600, $700 in some states, or it'd only be maybe $1,500 in the more expensive states. So that's not a huge sum of money. So it kind of negates the need to set aside money. When the problem is when we buy a full service funeral, which the industry calls traditional, you could spend $10,000 to $20,000 easily on the funeral and cemetery and luncheon and flowers, etc. And that's a huge expense not to be prepared for. But if you're having something simpler, then there might not even be a need to set the money aside or have, anything prepaid, because it's a lot easier to come up with $1,000 than it is $10,000.
Sure. Which raises, the second point that you made about planning ahead. What is it that you want? So that, number one, and from a financial perspective, you can get prepared for that, and also for your loved ones to know. And, and I do kind of the pre-work, and then you'd kind of do the whole funeral planning stuff. But I think, we just know the statistics that people say, oh, it's too soon, I'm too young, or whatever. I mean, this past week, a 54-year-old colleague of mine had a major heart attack while jogging, dropped dead. I'm sure he wasn't planning on that,
No.
nor was his wife or daughter, who just recently got married. And so now they're left with, I don't know if he had planned ahead. I don't know the circumstances, but yet it's just an example that we don't know. Tomorrow's not promised. And so all those excuses, I'm healthy, I'm too young, all those things really don't carry any water when it comes to the fact of, what is it that's important to you, because tomorrow's not promised. So, yeah.
Thinking about that is so important. It's a great gift to yourself, because then at least you have a voice in how you want your funeral to happen. Yes. It can really reflect who you are as a person. But it's also one of the biggest gifts you can give to your family is to take away some of those decisions. I've seen families, and I've heard from families, and I've personally been involved with families on both sides of the equation. The ones that have had grandma take care of everything, and they literally knew down to what she wanted to wear.
Yeah.
And just knowing that's what she wanted took a huge amount of burden off their shoulders. Mm-hmm. Even if it still cost a lot of money, they at least knew that's what she wanted. And I think that's what a lot of people want. They're afraid to make decisions, or they're afraid to not spend enough money because they just don't know what someone wants. And, on the other hand, in the case of, unexpected deaths, which are always tragic, people are left guessing, and then, they're in grief, and they're yes. shocked, and all of a sudden they need to make all these decisions, and they don't know if this casket is more reflective of their life or that one, or which urn looks better. I mean, you just don't know. And if you don't have these conversations, you're going to leave people guessing. Right. And I don't know. I just feel like I personally would want to have a say. Now, it's up to my family to follow through on my wishes, mm-hmm. but at least I can make it known, and I could take away some of that decision making for them.
Yeah, absolutely. How many times have we been to a funeral or a memorial service or some type of gathering, and you kind of, I've looked around at people and say, who are they talking about? Or this isn't reflective of the individual I knew, because you're right. We're all, the people left that are trying to organize it are left to guess, mm-hmm. is this something that would be important? And a lot of times it's not very reflective of, what the individual would have wanted. And so you're right, like me, like you, I want to have a say. So I think it's important that, we write that down, because it is. And I share the same thing. It's such a gift, not only to yourself, but to your loved ones. Yeah. I can't tell you the number of clients who have come to me saying, I need to get this together, because they were with a situation you described where someone had died and everything was planned down to the minute. And they said, you know what, it allowed us to have our mourning and our grief, and not worrying about, which dress grandma wanted to be put in, Absolutely. Or what's the funeral reading, or does she want to be cremated or buried? So, you're so right about that it is such a gift. And, we owe it to ourselves to really say what it is that we want.
I've already told my family, my sister and I have a pact to hold each other true to it. Sometimes I go to bed at night and I tell my boyfriend, remember, if I should die suddenly, this is what I want. He's like, stop it. And I'm like, no, I say this because I'm really serious. I'd be really upset if you had a full service funeral with me. If you touch me with an embalming fluid, I'll come and haunt you. So I just think it's so important to have these discussions, which is why I host death cafes, because I want people to have a safe place to like mull this over with themselves and with other people that don't look at them like they're weird.
Yeah.
But the other thing with pre-planning is, and you know this better than anyone, is that not just your death care, but your pre-death care.
Yes.
So like having a living will that outlines the type and amount of care that you want, should you not be able to talk for yourself, is also a huge gift to other people, so they don't have to make those decisions, and you ultimately get the care that you want. And in a lot of living wills, there's actually a section called funeral arrangements, where you can indicate, you know, what you want or what you don't want. Some of them might have a designated funeral agent section, and other times it could be a separate document. And I like to bring this one up because I think not a lot of people know about it. And, you know, to be honest, I didn't know about it before a couple of years ago. But in most states, you're next of your spouse, your parents, and then your kids, and then thereafter your next of kin have the right to plan your funeral. So unless you indicate otherwise in writing, then that's the order of, you know, who has the right to plan your funeral. So let's just take an example. Say that you're in a state where it requires all the next of kins to agree on the funeral arrangements, and you have 4 kids, one's estranged, and the other 3 live in all different states. Now all of these kids have to come into agreement about the funeral plans before you can actually have that funeral, burial, or a cremation. So it could create a nightmare. Now in this circumstance, if you can appoint one person to do it, one of the kids, or even your best friend, then that avoids that situation. And you know, it's always like that, the estranged child or the estranged parent that comes in and, like, you know, gives you exactly what you don't want. So having a document that says, this is who I want, this is who I give the rights to plan my funeral, and if you want to even elaborate further, and this is what I want for my funeral, then you can overcome that kind of next of kin chain. And another scenario would be, and I know we're getting a lot more, you know, progressive in the U.S. finally, but, you know, up until recently, if you were not married and you just had a partner, a live-in partner, or a longtime partner, if you should die and you were not legally married, they would not have the right to plan your funeral. Your parents would, or if you had children, they would.
They would. Wow.
And so, you know, that's kind of awful. It takes away that right of literally your loved one, your partner, from planning that. And so in those circumstances, even if you choose not to get married, but you are very strongly, you know, tied to a person and you want them to have the power to make those decisions, then simply outlining who you designate as your funeral agent is an easy way to make that very clear. And in most states, that will be upheld.
Great.
And again, this is like a know your rights thing. So on our website, we have under resources, it says state-by-state guide. And you can actually go in there, click on your state, and you can see what you need to do to establish a living will, what you need to do to establish a designated funeral agent, and whether home funerals are legal in your state. So you can actually get that information like that and know whether you need to notarize or witness or whatever the documents.
Wow, that is fantastic, because, you know, all that is so dispersed, but state by state. So folks that are listening in, and those of you that are watching the replay, you know, please go to I'mSorryToHear.com, and, you know, as Rachel said, under the resources, state by state, you can check out from your area. Now, Rachel, do you have things internationally, or is it just the U.S.?
Our plans are to go up to Canada as well, but it's just not in our scope at the moment.
Okay, sure, not a problem. Now, Pashta says, in Canada, the executor owns the body. If there isn't an executor of the estate, then it goes to the default list of the family members. Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah. And back to what you were saying, you know, it depends on the family members, and are they cohesive, or are they divisive, or is there, you know, people that just can't agree on whatever. So yeah.
Yep.
Very interesting. So in terms of funeral planning, you know, there's a lot of things floating out there. Funerals, traditional, cremation, just lots of information and probably lots of myths. So can you walk us through a little bit about kind of the funeral planning and what our options are?
Well, funeral planning is really not that difficult. But the first thing that you're going to want to decide is like, what type of funeral do you want? That includes the method of disposition, burial, or cremation. And it also includes like, do you want to have any ceremony around your funeral or not? So really, you have a couple of primary choices. So going back again to your methods of disposition, we have cremation, which has become increasingly popular for a variety of reasons. I think primarily because of the cost. But it's cremation by fire, right? Incineration. Well, guess what? In a couple of states, we have a new option. It's called biocremation or green cremation or water cremation. They're still finding an identity, but it is disintegration of your body by water. It's a rapidly decomposing of your body. You know what? At the end, it's the same result as a flame-based cremation. You get a pile of bones, it gets ground up, and then you get ashes, and voila. And it's really actually a fascinating process. I would recommend people go and Google biocremation and watch a little cartoony video on it. It's fascinating. And it's a lot better for the environment than cremation. Because people actually have the misconception that cremation is more environmentally friendly than burial, but it's not. The amount of CO2 and the amount of energy that's consumed to cremate a body is enormous. So if you really wanted to have a lower impact on the environment, you could consider biocremation if you like cremation, or you could consider a simple burial. So avoiding the use of embalming fluids, having a simple container such as a shroud or a plain pine box or even a cardboard box for that matter, and avoiding all the extra things that you would put in the ground. Not only is it better for the environment, but it's also cheaper. So, cremation, and then we have burial. So going back to burial, do you want to have something really, as they dub it, traditional, where you have a viewing the night before, a visitation the day of, a funeral service, procession to the graveside service, and that whole bit? Because, every single one of those steps adds up in terms of cost. Or do you want something simpler? In the Jewish faith, for example, we don't typically have viewings or visitation, so the bodies are usually not embalmed, which is 100% legal in every state, is not to be embalmed, by the way. But we just usually opt to have a graveside service, if anything. So everything happens really quick. Someone passes away, they get taken to the funeral home to be refrigerated for 24 or 48 hours, and then you're moved to a cemetery and buried. So you have options. You could go full regalia, or you could go simple. The third option that I'll throw in is body donation, because some people really like this option. They really like the idea of giving back, being used for medical purposes, for research, maybe even like forensics experimentation, where there's a couple of places in the US that are known for that, where they have like these body farms. But donating your body is probably the least expensive type of funeral you can have. And what happens with body donation is they would normally contract with a funeral home to pick up your loved one from the place of death and then take them in their care and then eventually deliver them to the medical school or whatever facility that would be taking ownership. And then after they're completed with the use of the cadaver, they would cremate them. And sometimes you have the options of getting the cremated remains back, and sometimes you don't. But most of them will end up having like an annual ceremony to invite the families and, basically honor the people that gave their bodies for the greater good. So it kind of falls under cremation, but I think it's interesting enough to separate into its own category.
Nice.
So that's the first thing, is what do you want? And how green do you want to be? And then you also have to decide like how much intervention you want your family to have versus a funeral home. Now, in the US these days, we've gotten really used to just kind of turning our loved ones over to these funeral professionals, and they take care of everything. 100 years ago, it was commonplace for us to take care of our own, right up to bringing them to the grave. So I don't know, when exactly that switched over, but that's a movement that I think is really beautiful, and a lot of people call it home funerals or DIY funerals.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, especially with the increasing knowledge of hospice care, and people are opting to have hospice care and have it at home, and let their loved ones and, some professionals help care for them through their final months and weeks and days. The caring doesn't need to stop there. When you eventually have your last breath, you can, ask your family or your close friends, would they want to participate in washing your body and, laying your body in position and putting you in a casket, and maybe even, if you have a cardboard casket, you can even get creative and you can have markers and crayons and paints, and you can leave notes and messages. So it's an option that in most of the states is legal. And in the few states that have exceptions, you can usually find a funeral director who is, home funeral friendly, that'll work with you for, a very low fee and let you have that honor to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think home funerals are really, really an awesome concept, even though it's really just a return to what we used to do.
Right.
But I don't know. I'm hoping that they catch on. I don't know if the skeevy factor is too much for Americans these days.
Yeah, I had a home funeral guide on as a guest, and it was just fascinating to just hear, and the fact that it is legal, and as you say, with hospice care, especially in the home, and then just continuing on, it just again brings so much closure, as opposed to whisking the body off to a funeral home, automatically just thinking that's what we have to do, and just turning our care over, and then showing up, standing there looking at a body in a casket that may or may not even look like, because of all the makeup and things, and standing there kind of just shaking hands with people with just a glazed look and then the body gets shipped off to the crematory or the cemetery. Yeah. There's such a gift in just being able to care for, and as you said, that's how it used to be done.
There's nothing wrong with a dead body. I mean,
right.
It doesn't suddenly become diseased and contagious. You're not going to die because you're touching a dead body.
Right.
And actually, I just read the latest Grim Reader from Josh Slocum of the Funeral Consignors Alliance International.
Yes.
And he actually talks about this, how just because someone died doesn't mean you need to call 911. 911 is to help prevent people from dying. When they're dead, it's the worst possible thing that could happen.
Right.
So, in England, he cites as an example that they don't understand that why, if someone dies at 2 a.m, we call the funeral director. They're like, just make a cup of tea and then go and relax and have a night's sleep, and then wake up in the morning and call them.
Right.
Which is yeah, you could. There's no harm in them just laying there and being there.
Sure.
Now, mind you, if you live in a very hot climate, you might want to take some measures to cool the body, air conditioning or ice packs, just to prevent some unpleasantness that naturally occurs with anyone that's died.
Sure.
But sure. I think it's awesome. And if no one's read it yet, I love Josh's writing. He is one of the funniest and also the most knowledgeable people on funerals in this country. And so it's probably posted at funerals.org, and it's called The Grim Reader, and they have it every quarter or twice a year, and it's just so educational but also very lighthearted. I find it an easy read.
Nice.
So let's go back to where we're talking about.
Go for it.
First, we got to say what kind of funeral we want.
What do you want? Yeah.
What kind of disposition do we want? And then we also need to figure out what happens to us after that funeral service. So with burial, it's pretty straightforward. You either have a cemetery or a natural burial ground, and you go to it and you have your burial. We all know we go in the ground. But cremation, you actually have a ton of choice of what to do with the ashes. So gone are the days that you put grandma on the mantle and have her passed down from generation to generation till no one knows who she is anymore.
Right.
There are so many creative and very personal ways that you could, do things with cremated ashes. You could simply scatter them, scatter them in your yard or in a park or at the beach discreetly. You can have them shot into space or lifted in a hot air balloon. You can have them made into vinyl records or a diamond. So like really anything that you could think of, they could do with ashes. You could be made, you could have some ashes integrated with tattoo ink. You can have them put into pieces of art. You can have them blown into glass. You can have them sunk in coral reefs. So I love when people say, oh, but I'm just going to be cremated. It's easy. I'm like, well, you really need to decide what to do with those ashes afterwards. You either have a preference or you don't. And if you don't, you could say, hey, family, do whatever you want with them. Split them up amongst you, or let yourselves decide. Or you can be very specific, like, hey, listen, I don't care what you do with 3/4 of my ashes, but I definitely want to be going into space. So, you have these decisions to make as well. So I think that's kind of the bulk of it. And then of course, after the funeral, you need to decide if you want some sort of gathering. Like, do you want to have a luncheon? Are you hosting a Shiva if you're, of the Jewish faith? Do you want to have a party, a celebration of life? So again, those are things you should think about. Like, what would you want afterwards? Would you want people to gather, or if they're going to spend $5,000 on a catered affair, are you going to send everyone on vacation to the Bahamas for a weekend? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I feel like these are all really easy decisions to make when you think ahead, and you don't have like this grief and loss hanging over you. You could just take a minute and think about your choice.
Right. And, and I love, Rachel, what you're speaking about. It's just some real practical things of just really thinking about what is important to you, what's your values, what, within your priorities, your preferences, and things that I also talk about kind of with the living will and the healthcare proxy and your medical choices. This is just part of the whole package. And so a lot of times we want to stop with, okay, well, when I'm not able to speak for myself, so-and-so can make my medical decisions. And then they stop there. It's like, well, there's a whole continuum still of, your death and aftercare and all of those pieces that you're speaking about. So yeah, this is fantastic. So folks, type in questions, comments, how is this landing? Maybe Rachel's doing such a fantastic job that there aren't any questions. But this is really great, Rachel. I'm so appreciative. So let's talk a little bit about I'm Sorry to Hear. I know you referenced a little bit about some resources there, but tell us what else is on your website.
So right now, the bulk of our site is really in two areas. So one is our marketplace of funeral professionals. So we have some 14,000 funeral homes across the US with very, very, very comprehensive information on each and every one of them. So you could slice and dice that information. You could say, I'm looking for a Jewish funeral home in Philadelphia, or I'm looking for a green burial funeral home in Milwaukee, or I'm looking for a Jewish green burial, independently owned place in Baltimore. So you can really, really easily find funeral professionals near you, funeral homes. We also have in our directory all the possible places that you can donate your body. So it's like a body donation directory in there. So you can figure out where you live if that's an option for you. Body donation is one of those things you should definitely plan ahead for, and if possible, pre-register with them so that it makes it as easy as possible when the time comes. We actually have a list of organ donation or organ procurement organizations should you want to give the gift of life and you need a place to start. We have some 3,000 florists on our site that are specializing in sympathy flowers and gifts and arrangements. And we also have a plethora of others like clergy and celebrants and home funeral guides. We partnered with the National Home Funeral Alliance to list all their home funeral guides and educators so that they're not just on a home funeral website, they're on a mainstream website. So people are like, what's this? Right. So literally in a couple of clicks, you can find the providers that you're looking for. And we also have this monster library of resources and articles. So in our resources, we have a funeral planning checklist, which you can download and just use as like a beacon to guide you through the decisions you make. It's not a 1, 2, 3, you do this first, this second. It's very much like, here are the groups of decisions that you need to make. just so you can keep tabs on them. There's actually a vital information form. So this is information a funeral home would ask for a death certificate. And there's another sheet where you could document thoughts on what bank accounts you need to close, what credit cards or utilities, etc. So you could start jotting stuff down. I love the checklist. It's so simple, but it really helps you think through all the things that come with losing a loved one.
That's excellent.
We have a casket guide, so we talk about the different types of caskets and the different price points of them, including green burial options like wicker and bamboo and banana leaf and cardboard and pine, just plain old wood box. We have that state-by-state guide. So you could go on there, click your state, and see what all your rights are in each of those states. Death with dignity is one of those. Home funerals, green burials, funeral agents, living wills. And then, the other big resource we have is our article library. So every week we try to come up with an article that targets a question that someone might have about funeral planning. And so we have some 200 articles that are very educational in nature that, hopefully would answer many of the questions that you have. And you can go on our blog area. So it's like, imsorrytohear.com/blog. And you can actually search, for green burial or home funerals or cremation or green cremation or biocriemation, and you can actually find all the articles on that topic. So we aggregate all of that in one spot, so you don't really even need to ever leave.
That's fantastic. So really kind of one-stop shopping with multiple options, which I think is great, because some people will gravitate toward funeral homes, others want information on cremation, some want green burial. So I think it's fantastic that you have aggregated so much information all in one spot. And like you said earlier, you've taken the work away, and people can just go to imsorrytohear.com and find what they need.
I've literally put all the information on a silver platter, so please consume it. But I'm actually really excited for this summer. We've been working really, really hard over the past few months to build a new website that we're going to brand as Funerals 360. So if you're seeing this and it's a few months out from June and you go to imsorrytohear.com, you might be redirected to Funerals 360. And it's going to be a lot more interactive. So based on why you're on our site, to plan in advance or to plan at the time of need, we're going to help guide you to the resources that are most appropriate for you. And in that, not only are we going to still have the same awesome directory of funeral professionals that we have now, but we're going to have expanded information on all them. So funeral homes in particular, we're going to start posting prices. So at a quick glance, you could see what a direct cremation would cost, or an immediate burial, or an average funeral cost. And eventually that is going to lead us to a feature that'll allow you to cost compare based on your own, custom built funeral. So that'll be a future version. So that'll be coming in Funerals 360. Our user dashboard is going to be a lot more personal, so you can actually save your favorite articles, save your favorite resources, save a checklist, share that with people. And then the other thing that we'll be adding in that makes it more of that kind of end-to-end or full circle funeral planning is that we're going to help people communicate the funeral details with everyone that they need. So there's actually going to be a way that you can input the funeral details, input the email addresses, or grab a link to post on Facebook that has all the funeral details that people are going to need to know, and then memorialize them through an online memorial. So that's all coming out with a new version, and it's going to be beautiful, and it's just going to be so much more interactive, and I think a better experience for everyone in getting to the information that they need to.
Sounds wonderful. Wow.
I'm excited.
Even more comprehensive than what you already have, which is very comprehensive. So again, folks, if you have any questions. So what's the best, if someone has any questions directly, is there a way to get in touch with you, Rachel, or should they reach out to your team, or what's the best way for people, or just through the website?
So, I mean, I think that, our website's designed to be self-sufficient, so you can find that information. We do get some backdoor consumer inquiries, a lot of them regarding to finances and how to pay for a funeral. But what I'd recommend is if you can't find what you're looking for on our website, you can email me. Usually info gets to me, info@imsorrytohear.com. But if you have a question about something that's really hyper local, some of the greatest resources in this country are the local funeral consumers alliances. They are the local feet on the street. They know state laws and rights better than anyone else. They could tell you whether $3,000 is outrageous for a cremation or whether that's average. And they are designed for people to call and email them and get, a live person to respond to, more so than we are.
Okay. Okay. And they're in each state, right? If someone Googles Funeral Consumer Alliance, they can find the information for their specific state?
They could, or they can even go to I'mSorryToHear.com and they could click on their state and they could choose Funeral Consumers Alliance and they can find all the ones in their state.
Excellent. Even better. Super. Well, thank you. This has just really been wonderful. So
I know that there's some juicy questions out there, guys.
Yeah, I know. Come on, guys.
Stuff that you're afraid to ask or you're embarrassed to ask. There's no shame in asking questions. There's no dumb questions.
Right, right. Well, Rachel, I think you have provided such tremendous information and things that, we normally wouldn't think about, right? That I think that, and they're not difficult things. It's just a matter of sitting down and going, oh, wow, that's important. I need to decide what that is. And so the checklist and things that you have, the information is really a nice guide and resource for people to be able to do that. And so, again, the message is planning ahead and being, prepared and just voicing what it is that's important to you and what you want so that no one has to guess. And that there are resources, for example, I'mSorryToHear.com, that can really walk you through things because, I didn't know, you just go to the local funeral home that the family's used for 1,000 years and you don't even know, again, as you said, whether they're still locally owned, independently owned, or whether a corporation has it. You have no clue whether you're paying in the ballpark of the prices because there's no comparison. So I think that we need to think about funeral planning and funeral homes and all that goes along with that, like you would plan a party, plan a wedding, purchase a car. You just, as we said earlier, you just don't go in and just take the first thing. Just really to be able to do that. So,
and know your rights, of course. Know
your rights. Yeah. Yes.
The funeral rules, guys. You should read up on them. They're very, very, very important.
So, as we're kind of getting close to the top of the hour, Rachel, so you've provided us with a tremendous amount of information. Is there kind of parting words, some, kind of summarize or things you just want to make sure that people walk away with before we kind of wrap up?
Sure. Well, first off, it was my pleasure being here. Thank you so much. I love talking about this, and I hope I get people a little bit excited to go home and think about this stuff on their own. Just coming back to what I started with, if there's 3 things you could take away from this, this conversation today, it's know your rights, know the funeral rule, know your local rights. Plan ahead. Think about what you want, talk about what you want, document what you want. And people like yourself, Kim, are so instrumental in doing that. So while you're talking about the living will, like sneak in there these funeral arrangements and do you want a designated funeral agent? Have that conversation in that. Or if you're doing estate planning or financial planning, have these conversations then. Yeah. Pre-plan, don't prepay. And finally, shop around. So whether you're planning in advance or at the time of need, just know that you need to know who you're working with. Make sure that you want to work with them from a personality perspective. And by shopping around, you could save yourself hundreds to thousands of dollars just by asking a couple different funeral homes and cemeteries, what their services cost. So don't spend more than you have to. You don't need to spend $10,000 on a funeral. It's an American myth. We can get away from that. We can spend as much or as little as we want. It's up to you.
Great, great. We do have one question here that came in from Chris. She's asking about embalming versus not to embalm. Why would you or why would you not? I know it's a whole other hour, right, Rachel?
I hope no funeral directors are watching this because they're going to hate what I have to say.
It's okay. I have a good friend that is one and she'll be fine.
I hate embalming. I think the process is so gross and unnecessary. The only reason why embalming exists is for temporary preservation of the body. And it came about in like the Civil War era when there was soldiers being left on the battlefield and it could be weeks before they went home to their families for a burial. And so they came up with embalming as a way to preserve literally on the battlefields. It got popular when Abe Lincoln got embalmed and he had his tour across the US and he looked alive. But there's really no reason to embalm. There are alternatives to embalming, such as cooling the body through refrigeration or ice packs or another cooling agent like dry ice. And in no state is embalming ever required. So even if you're not having a funeral for a week, you can request that the body be refrigerated rather than embalmed. And refrigeration costs a heck of a lot less than embalming, which on average costs $800. So, I mean, I know this is a little bit of a personal preference here, but I just feel like it's a really wasteful thing to do. And it's also very toxic. Not to the people viewing the body, but for the embalmer, they're using formaldehyde, which is a known carcinogen. It's not a secret. It's on like the Food and Drug Administration's like worst chemicals out there. So embalming has become an American tradition as part of the traditional funeral, but it's not necessary. And if a funeral home tells you that it's required, it's not. They might require it to have a public viewing, but it is not required by law, ever. So again, my personal choice is it's not necessary, but maybe it's something that you want, but it's a choice. You don't have to if you don't want to. There's alternatives.
Right. I mean, you bring up such a great point that, we're talking about a dead body, right? That you're not supposed to look alive and be preserved and have makeup and, to look like you're still alive. I mean, how many conversations do you hear afterwards, at a luncheon or whatever? Oh, so-and-so looked really good. They look like themselves, or, the makeup was too much, or that it's a dead body, right? We're not supposed to look alive.
Or on the other hand, it's like, ooh, that didn't look like them at all.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
When my grandfather passed away, he was Italian Catholic, and I'll wrap up after this, but the family insisted on a traditional funeral. This was before I had my company, by the way. And my last memory is seeing him in the casket with a shaven face and bloated and with a leakage from his arm. And it looked nothing like him, nothing like the pup-up that I knew, the gruffy, scruffy, bearded pup-up. He looked fake and waxy. And, it was not because it was a bad embalming job. It's just, that's what embalming does. It throws the color of that person off. And it just didn't look like him. I much actually would have rather seen him in his natural dead state than I would have the way that I saw him. But unfortunately, that's my last memory of him. And I try to erase that from my memory and just, remember the gruffy pup-pup. But, it's not something that we have to do. And so, just like everything in funeral planning, you have choices to embalm or not to embalm. That's the question.
That's the question. Great. What a wonderful way to kind of wrap things up as we're coming to the top of the hour. And thank you, Pasha. She says the Advanced Death Care Directive, and she gives a website, deathcaredirective.com. Excellent template for post-death options. Thank you, Pasha, who again is out of Canada. So excellent. Well, thank you, Rachel. This has been so helpful, and I'm sure that folks are walking away with lots of information. Judging from the not a whole lot of questions, I think you've really provided a lot of food for thought and for people to be able to check out all the resources and things on your page. So
I hope so.
It was a great hour that always flies by, and tonight was no exception. So thank you.
Thanks for making it so easy, Kim.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you, everyone who tuned in. A number of you are live here tonight, and I know a number will be watching the replay. So I hope that you gained some valuable information as you move forward. And again, as Rachel said, it's about pre-planning and options and know your rights. So again, as we wrap up, I'll be coming back to you next month. We're still finalizing the guests for next month, but you will be getting the newsletter with that information and the sign-up link. So once again, thank you everyone that was here tonight, and have a great evening, and we will be in touch soon. Take good care, everyone. Bye-bye.